How do you build a deck? I've touched on this topic a few times now, even doing a whole series on decks I've built, but I'd like to devote a full video to this topic. The question is one that newer players ask quite a lot, and I'd like to be able to provide that resource for them. When you first start out with a trading card game, you're usually handed a pre-made deck so you can get a handle on how the game actually plays. If you get to take that deck home with you, maybe after playing it a few more times you'll start to make some small changes, slotting out cards you think are underperforming and swapping in cards you think will be stronger. But building a deck from scratch requires you to have an understanding of how a deck works. With a deck, you're going to want to be able to play a card every turn, and you're going to want that card to have the largest impact possible. Usually that will mean playing the most expensive thing you can every turn. A 1-drop on turn 1, a 2-drop on turn 2, a 3-drop on turn 3, and so forth. Later in the game, things will become more flexible or even improvisatory as you start to rely more and more on top decks. But to get through those first few turns, you're going to want to run some cheaper cards in a deck. However, you don't want to run too many because on turn 10 you really don't want to top deck a 1-drop. So you should also have a few expensive cards, what are often called bombs, that you can slam on the board on later turns. The spread of costs in your deck is called your curve, and for a typical deck, what is often called mid-range or tempo, you want that curve to peak somewhere between 2 and 4. In Lorcana specifically, you also need to worry about the proportion of your deck that is inkable. If your whole deck is inkable, you don't need to worry about this, but uninkable cards can be very powerful, and it's tempting to put lots of them in your deck. But then you run into issues of not being able to actually play any of them because inevitably you'll draw a hand of all uninkables and then you just get stuck. Having about a fifth of your deck, or 12 cards in a deck of 60, being uninkable is usually fine, with more than that often leading to problems. However, cheaper uninkables are usually easier to play, so you can sometimes get away with running more of those than usual. But before you can start putting any cards into a deck, you have an important decision to make. What colors will your deck be? I plan to go into greater detail about the strengths and weaknesses of each color in a later video, but for now, here's a quick summary. Amber is largely focused on characters with healing and strength manipulation tools to keep them alive, and cards that care about the characters in your deck or in play. Amethyst is the color of unrestricted card draw, as well as an aggressive color with lots of rush and challenger characters. Emerald is the tricky color, giving reckless to opposing characters, punishing your opponent for challenging your characters, and is one of the main evasive colors. Ruby is another regressive color, being the other main evasive color and being the color of lore stealing and unrestricted character removal. Sapphire has a focus on ink ramp, getting a larger inkwell than normal, as well as a focus on synergies with items. Steel is the most aggressive color, with lots of challengers and direct damage to efficiently remove characters. Each deck can have up to 2 colors, and there are lots of emergent synergies that arise from different pairings. For an example deck, let's pick Amber and Steel. Before we get into the specific cards we're adding, I want to reiterate, as I've done several times, you almost always want to run 4 copies of every card in your deck. That will make your deck more consistent and also frees you to ink something knowing you have more copies to actually play. Consistency wins games. Firstly, a deck should mostly be characters. They are the source of lore, which is how you win the game, and challenging is going to be the main way you get rid of opposing characters. To keep it simple, let's stick to more or less vanilla characters, or those without abilities. At 1 ink, we can run Stitch New Dog and Goon's Maleficent's Underlings, who are both 2/2s with 1 lore, and Lilo Making a Wish, who's a 1/1 with 2 lore. This is a lot of 1-drops, a fifth of our total deck, but if most of our characters don't have abilities, we want to make sure we have something to play turn 1. At 2, the only available vanilla character is Minnie Mouse Beloved Princess, who we will include, but we'll expand our horizons a tad and put in Simba Protective Cub and Prince Airing Dashing and Brave as well, as they have pretty simple keywords. At 3, we can run Mickey Mouse True Friend and Kristoff Official Ice Master, and we'll throw in Hercules True Hero as another bodyguard. That's 9 unique cards so far, so if we're sticking with 4 copies of each, we can make 6 more picks. At 4 ink, we can run Ariel on Human Legs, who may as well be vanilla, but now we're starting to run out of choices. For now, let's fill in the rest with Captain Hook, Captain of the Jolly Roger, Cerberus Three-Headed Dog, Kronk Right-Hand Man, Simba Returned King, and Maui Demigod. This deck, as it is playable. We just play our most expensive character we can every turn, quest, and challenge when needed. Most of our characters have pretty good strength and willpower for their cost, as they don't have too much in the way of abilities, so our characters should stick around. It is at this point, where you have a rough draft of your deck, that you take a look at it and think, What is this missing? What is my deck not doing that it could be? And I know some of you have probably already been futilely yelling at your screens what the answer is when I put Hook into the deck, and that is removal. Having ways to get rid of opposing characters without challenging lets you preserve your own characters and quest with them more. Captain Hook of the Jolly Roger makes it real obvious as he calls out one such card: fire the cannons. If we're running Hook, we may as well run that card too, right? Well, in order to do that, we'll need to drop something to make room for them. And looking at this deck, the most obvious answer to me is Maui. At 8 ink, most games we won't even be able to play him, particularly since, as I've previously stated in other videos, if you're inking and playing every turn, you will naturally empty out your hand at 6 or 7 ink. So he's a pretty easy swap out here. But is one source of removal enough? Steel has two other options right now: Smash and Grab Your Sword. Smash is a pretty easy choice as it's inkable, and we can fit that in by dropping our next expensive card in Simba Returned King. But Grab Your Sword is uninkable, and if we put that in our deck, we'll have 16 uninkable cards. To make sure we can always ink something, we should probably drop one set of 4. In this case, let's drop Little Lilo. She does make 2 lore, but she's also very easy to remove. What else are we missing? How about a way to refill our hand? In Steel, we can run Beast's Mirror. Now that we have so much removal, we don't really need to be running quite so many 1-drops, so let's swap out the goons. In Amber, we can run Stitch Carefree Surfer, who is a little expensive, but is worth it if we can get to him. So let's swap out Kronk for Surfer Stitch. That does mean we're not running anything at 6, but that's not really that big a deal. The most important costs to hit are 1 through 5. And there you go! You've made a pretty solid mid-range control deck. If you're new to the game, this would honestly be a pretty decent deck to be your first one. It's pretty simple, as most of the characters are vanilla or only have single keywords, but can still hold its own relatively well. Once you've gotten used to how it plays, you can start making more complicated substitutions, like finding room for Tinkerbell's Tiny Tactician and Giant Fairy for more control, or Beast Hardheaded to deal with items, Maximus Relentless Pursuer to get better trades, or Hades Lord of the Underworld to get back defeated characters. There are a lot of card options, and once you have a good skeleton for your deck, what you slot in often becomes a matter of personal taste, or a specific answer to popular decks in the competitive meta. Let's tackle something a bit more complicated, a build-around deck, or combo deck. You want a specific interaction to happen between a couple cards, and you need to build the rest of the deck to facilitate that. Let's start with the idea of the 2 Ariels, singing songs and playing items. Obviously, Ariel Spectacular Singer and Ariel Who's It Collector are going to be in the deck. On the song side, we'll want to include songs, clearly, and in these colors currently we can put in Be Our Guest, Part of Your World, and Let It Go. We should also run Ursula's Shell Necklace as a payoff to all the singing we'll be doing, and it's also an item. We can also run Sebastian Court Composer as a singer in case we don't draw an Ariel. We should also run the rest of the available items in Dinglehopper, Lantern, and Coconut Basket. With all those items, we also want to run Belle Inventive Engineer and Maurice World Famous Inventor. Maurice in particular can draw us a lot of cards, so we want to get to him as quickly as possible. So in addition to Lantern, we'll also run One Jump Ahead, which is also another song. Now, one issue that may be looming is this is 20 uninkable cards in the deck. That is a lot! But most of them are quite cheap, or are ramp pieces, and we've got a fair bit of draw in this deck with Maurice and the Necklace, as well as Be Our Guest and Singer Ariel's on-play effect. To round things out, let's throw in Flounder Voice of Reason as a 1-drop, and Moana of Motunui for the lore, and even more untapping for Who's It Collector. Now, I have no idea if this deck will actually work. I just thought it up in my brain just now, so now we test it. My next non-newsroom video will be a gameplay video putting this deck through its paces. It might work, it might not. If it doesn't, we go back to the deck list and make changes. Maybe we put in more inkables or more characters, or maybe the deck just doesn't work at all and we abandon it. But the process of having an idea, populating a deck for it, trying it out, iterating, making changes, that is how you build a deck.